welcome to the final edition of the 2025 Kansas Legislature show from right here in downtown Bunker Hill, Kansas. We are so delighted to have a great crowd, a big crowd, our biggest of the season that was with us, and I am your host and moderator this evening, Becky Kaiser. I am a news reporter for Eagle Media in Hayes, for Hayes Post and Eagle Radio, and also I'm a fellow at the Docking Institute for Public Affairs at Fort Hays State University, which helps support and bring you the program, and we appreciate their support of it as well. Let's meet our panelists this evening. We are delighted and honored to have everybody with us, and it's always a trip to come to Bunker Hill, and we have one new person with us this evening, so it's a really exciting show. Starting with us, our good friend from Concordia is Senator Elaine Bowers, who of course is from a Republican from District 36, and well known to our audience and people in the area. Next to her, of course, is Representative Troy Waymaster. Troy is from District 109 right here in Bunker Hill. Sitting next to Representative Waymaster is our Senator Brenda Dietrich, who is joining us again from Topeka. And we really appreciate you coming all the way from out there, Brenda. It's nice to hear the east side of the more urban area input into this, and she is from District 20 in Topeka. Also joining us again for our show this evening is Dawn Wolf, representative from District number 107. She's a Republican from Bennington. Good to have you with us, Representative Wolf. And for the first time, joining us from the Great Bend, District number 112, Representative Sherri Brantley. Welcome. Great to have all of you. Well, we're going to come back and start with you, Senator Bowers. And if you would, just remind our audience what committees you've served on and what you've been working so hard on this session.
Wonderful. Well, this is my 19th year in Topeka. So I was in the House first, now the Senate. And I do have 4 committees I serve on during session. And transportation, I'm an auto dealer in real life, so I definitely belong on that committee. I chair local government transparency and ethics. I really respect local government and like to work with them as team members. And then I have judiciary, which I've been on that since I've been in the Senate. And then in the afternoon, I have utilities. And we talk about a lot of different topics in utilities. Oil over this way, wind in the northern part of the state, northeast part of the state, and what our rates are doing across Kansas. So we have a lot of topics in utilities as well.
All right. Representative Waymaster, tell us about your committee work.
Well, thank you, Becky. So I serve as the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, which is the budget committee for the House. And this year was a different process because we actually drafted the initial budget in the legislature and not waited for the governor's budget to be introduced the first week. Well, I'm sure we are going to talk about that. So it was a different kind of a burden. Maybe I should say burden, but challenge. Very good. Thank you. Challenge. Yeah. It was a unique challenge that I had this year because we changed the formal process of how we drafted the budget. So things didn't start in January, things started in September of 2024. So it was a lengthy process getting that started. There are some things that we need to work through when we start the legislative session in 2026 in regards to how both chambers handle the budget. But that's my primary function, is I'm the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. I was also named on a new committee that was created by the Speaker of the House this year, and actually on Wednesday we had our first meeting, and that is the House Select Committee on Government Oversight. And actually we analyzed SNAP benefits through the Department of Children and Families. We can talk about that. I know it's been kind of in the media for the last couple of days since that meeting happened. And then I'm also the chairman of the Build Kansas program, which was instituted about 2 years ago. And we can talk about that because with some of the federal funding cuts that we've been seeing, that's been impacting the Build Kansas program quite a bit, especially in regards to most recently the city of Hayes.
Yes. We lost some money.
Never had the money.
Okay. That's
so
true. That is true.
The money would be delegated if the federal government had approved the application. But we can talk about the nuances of how all that works later on. But it has been challenging being chairman of that committee, and here we've dedicated money to Build Kansas for communities, for projects as far as infrastructure. But then with the changes that are coming down on a federal level, it's impacting the applications that we're receiving from those communities.
Interesting. Senator Dietrich, talk a little bit about your committee work.
Thank you, Becky. I'm so happy to be here. So I've been in the Senate now for 5 years. I was in the House for 4, so this is my 9th year in the legislature. So Senator Bowers and I both serve on transportation. That's our 8:30 in the morning committee. And then at 9:30, I chair financial institutions and insurance, which is the insurance regulatory piece, and banks and credit unions and pensions. So that's a very interesting committee, and we had many bills this year, probably 40, that came through our committee. And I have 2 chairs in the House that I work with. One's the insurance chair and one's the financial institutions and pensions chair. So it's a pretty busy committee. So, and then at 10:30, I have Fed and State, Federal and State Affairs, which does a lot of the elections, because we don't have elections committee in the Senate like they do in the House, because it's a smaller group of people, 40 people. So we have fewer committees. So Fed and State picks up elections and lots of bills that have anything to do with gaming, gambling, guns, abortion, anything like that comes through Fed and State Affairs. And then at 1:30, I have Commerce. So I was Vice Chair of Commerce for 2 years when previously, and so now I'm a member of Commerce Committee, but we've done quite a bit of work in that committee as well this year, that when we talk about the things that we thought went well this session, we've got some bills that came through Commerce in the Senate, Commerce in the House, that we have passed that will be good for all of our communities, whether you're urban, suburban, or rural.
Good to hear. And let's now hear from Representative Wolf and what you have been working on.
This year, I was on local government, and in the local government one, we've talked about that 3-mile buffer around cities and how that affects people that live in rural but don't get a vote on that kind of stuff. And so I think we're going to do an interim committee. We decided it was just too much to just decide in committee at that time, but it really does affect people. In maybe you live just outside the city limits and you have cattle or something and they want to put something there, and so they're like, we had someone come in and talk to us about once his cattle were sold, he couldn't replace them, and then whoever bought it wouldn't be able to have cattle if he sold it. So just stuff like that we need to look at and see how we can fix that. Then in K-12, I was the one who had the bill for the National Guard. I carried that one. It was $285, and that one was giving these credits that the military has, and they don't always use them all. And so we are able to now pass them down to either a spouse or one dependent. So they can use those for furthering their education, or we also opened it up where the actual service person could use it to get a doctorate or something higher than what it had before. So that was a really good bill to have passed. And then I was also on tax, and the unique thing about that is I was the only freshman that was on that. I was the only newbie, but I really did enjoy that one. And people have asked about property taxes. Property taxes are difficult because it's really the counties and the cities and the schools that have property tax. Now that Kansas has given up their 1.5 mills, we're out of the property tax business for all intents and purposes. And so just looking at that and how we can help, there are 18 mandated things that we give to counties that the state has appointed for them. So do we take some of those back? I don't know. That's a discussion for later, but it is something that we've discussed in tax committee of how do we go about helping with property tax, since we really don't have any of them that we're regulating onto property owners.
And I know that's a question when I've talked to legislators and they've been out at town halls and that sort of thing, that you get asked about that a lot.
Very
and
much.
You know, it's kind of, you know, an educational thing that you have to do, that there's not a whole lot we can do. So we'll talk a little bit more about that.
And Dawn was a county commissioner for 6 years, so she lived that life as a local person.
Right.
Understanding the ins and outs from that level and now looking at it from the state level.
good experience, absolutely. Well, finally, we want to again say welcome to Representative Sherri Brantley from Great Bend, her first time on our show. And since you are new to us and to many of people in our audience, except of course the Great Bend people, tell us a little bit about yourself as well.
I'd love to, and thank you so much for letting me come today. This has been an honor, and I serve with some fabulous people in the House and the Senate. And I'm a 37-year veteran educator. I taught everything from a daycare director to preschool, first grade, kindergarten, all the way through 8th grade. And then I left public ed and went to Fort Hays State University. I was assistant professor in teacher education there. And then after driving to Hays, between Great Bend and Hays every day, and I had kids at home, I left and went back home and taught 4th grade. And then I was a middle school math coach for a couple years. And then I went to Kansas MTSS and Alignment as a math specialist for the state. And I've spent the last 6 years with them. And last summer I left and worked on my campaign and became the next representative for the 112th district. And kind of have a unique perspective now. I spent last fall as a long-term sub in 3rd grade. I had not been in a classroom for 20 years, so it was quite an enlightening experience. Yes, things have changed, but it was perfect going to the House. I'm on the education and K-12 budget committees and legislative modernization, but for the education and K-12 budget, that gave me a great perspective to be able to see what's going on in the classroom now. So that I felt like was a great strength to be able to see. And there were a lot of things that were coming through the education committee that I did work with, some of the assessment pieces and such that I worked for the state and helped with. So it was nice to see it from a different perspective. And then since I've been home, I'm long-term subbing in 6th grade right now. So if my 6th graders are watching, hello. So today I taught 6th grade, and they were excited to maybe go home and watch me on TV tonight. So kind of a different piece. Some of the things that we brought through education, there's a lot of really great things. And I think that we have a committee of educators that have been in schools recently, so we kind of have a little bit of a different perspective. So I think that we have some insights that maybe we wouldn't have had before. And one bill that came through the Senate, SB 114, a few years ago, you passed where private and homeschool kids could go and compete in sports with local school districts. Well, the CAM students out of Fort Hays State University for science and math school weren't allowed to participate in school. So we passed a bill this year, and I received a card from Bryce Steffens, who is a senior in high school living at Hays, on campus at Fort Hays, and he just participated in his first track meet this last week. Oh, exciting. And he was second in the hurdles, and I believe like third in the 200. So that's exciting. That's really seeing the fruit of what we're doing, and that's exciting for me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for a little bit about what you've been doing. And we want to, you're talking about 6th grade, and I guess that we might start at that level with kind of a civics lesson and jump in. And Troy, I know that you, because you corrected me on my word here, but we're talking about biennium and how it actually works for the state legislature, that you have to be looking ahead a year. You're looking at 2026, as you mentioned.
Right. And so the way it's set up for 2 years, that's why it's called a biennium, is because that's the term of the House members. And so when you have a bill that's introduced, it's actually viable for those 2 years of that House member's term, or the 2 years of the biennium. One thing that was done years ago was actually setting up a biennium budget. And so you had, not only would you do it year by year under Governor Brownback, we actually had 2 years of a budget that was passed. Ultimately, what ended up happening was you would still do another budget the next year. But what biennium means is that those bills that are introduced that may have not had a hearing, or maybe they were passed out of committee and they were never debated on the Senate or the House floor, is still alive for next year for discussion. The only bills that are not viable are the ones that did pass both chambers and the governor vetoed. And then if somebody still thinks that is a wonderful idea at the beginning of January of 2026, they can introduce it again and see what happens to the fate of that particular bill. But that's basically that's what a biennium means. Is that's basically the last for 2 years, and there's the viability of what we discussed in the legislature.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the budget. It was passed, and as Representative Waymaster talked about, the way it was done was different this year for the first time. And as we know, and hopefully everybody knows that, oh, and by the way, before I forget, don't forget that you're part of this program as well, and we do want you to give us a call. You can do that at any time, 1-800-337-4788. And we have an email question, too, that we have for a couple of the legislators. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But I did want to kick off with the budget a little bit. And as hopefully everybody has learned and knows at this point that education funding is the biggest part and responsibility of the legislators of Kansas. Yep. But let's go back to what you were talking about a little bit, Representative Waymaster, and how this budget came about, the funding for it, and the discussions of it a little bit differently than we'd ever done before.
Well, this has been in discussions. The Speaker of the House and I meet weekly, and we've been doing that during the tenure of Speaker Hawkins being Speaker of the House. And he has always toyed with the notion of the legislature creating the budget. In July of 2024, we had a meeting, he and I and my vice chair, Representative Kyle Hoffman at the time. And then on the Senate side, it was the Senate President, Ty Masterson, and then the Senate Ways and Means Chair, Rick Billinger, and Vice Chair J.R. Clays. We had a meeting, and we were talking about how would that look if the legislature would create the budget. And so the Speaker and the President challenged us to submit to them basically a paradigm of how we thought that would look and how would we work through it. And so I submitted to them a 2.5-page document outlining exactly how I would interpret the best way of the legislature creating the budget. So then in September, because they took most of my ideas, I was named chair of the committee to discuss the process on how to make the legislative budget. We had 2 meetings. We talked about exactly how that would look. And then in November, we had what was called the Special Committee on Legislative Budget. I was chair again of that committee, and that's when we looked through all 98 agencies and departments and boards of the state of Kansas, their requests that they made to the governor's office. We had also been able to sit on the appeal process, so we already knew as far as Chairman Rick Billinger and I, we knew what was not included in the budget. But then when we had the 6 meetings going through every single agency, commission, board, department's request, which at the time totaled $1.1 billion, on top of what the budget was passed in 2024. And that's what they were asking for in the next supplemental budget. And so we then started having the discussions on what should be included in the budget, what should not. And then a week before Christmas, we ended those meetings. Our attorneys, the revisor's office for the legislature, then started drafting the bill. And on the very first day of session, which in the 9 years that I've been a chair of appropriations, I have never introduced a budget bill on the first day of session. And what that allowed us to do was to have the budget committees start having the deliberations with the agencies and departments earlier. Because what would happen in the past is that we wouldn't get the governor's budget until the Thursday after we started session, until it was actually officially released from the budget director. Then our research department would break it up, and that would take at least 3, maybe 4 weeks. So you're not talking about having these deliberations until the first week of February. We were able to have that the first week of session. And again, the first time that I've been appropriations chair, we had our budget passed out of the House before the midterm part of session, which is called turnaround. Usually that's around the middle of March. And we had it passed around February 20th, and then we passed it over to the Senate, and then we can talk about what happened over there.
That's the first time we saw it.
And that was the first time they saw the budget, which the process needs to change.
Needs to be tuned up.
It needs to be tuned up, and that's going to be my expression. But I mean, as far as having the deliberations and the discussions about the budget, we were able to tackle those a lot sooner than we had in the past.
So that sounds like a positive.
It was a positive.
I think it worked really well on the House side. I think
Oh, I do
I think
too.
on the Senate side, it wasn't quite as smooth. But,
I would agree. I would agree.
What would you like to see change, Senator Dietrich?
well, I think part of the, I'll use the word challenge again. Part of the challenge we had was we got it later, and we did not break up the budget and give it to committees to be able to, like the Commerce Committee would look at the Commerce Department budget. Education Committee looks at the education budget. That's how we had done it in the past, and it didn't quite go that same way. And then we would have hearings on those agency budgets, and then give that feedback to Ways and Means on the Senate side.
It was my
Yeah.
impression, and the one thing that I had suggested is that, okay, it was indicated very early that the House is going to initiate the budget process.
Yeah.
So my committee, we knew that we were going to have to start with this. The budget committee chairs knew that they were going to have to initiate the budget process. But I had always thought that the Senate would start doing, hearings or
Yes.
deliberations or having
Yes.
some budget discussion
So did
in Ways
we.
and Means.
So did we.
I'm glad we're all on the same page. So hopefully next year it'll be a little bit smoother. And they didn't. And I mean, every day I check the House calendar and the Senate calendar. I'm one of those, I guess, old school individuals that like to have it printed, and my assistant brings it and puts it on my desk every morning. And I always would look and see what Ways and Means had planned for the week. And in the month of January, there was nothing. And then starting in February, they met maybe 2 days a week. And the topic item was House discussion or House appropriations discussion on HB 2007.
The budget bill.
The budget bill. And that would be it. I think Senate Ways and Means, the Senate should have been having hearings, and they could have been having informational hearings with the agencies and departments and finding out exactly what their supplemental requests were. It didn't have to wait until we handed it off. And then when we did hand it off to the Senate, it was a crash course trying to get through it and having basically 2 weeks to have the discussions with agencies and departments, and then putting their own fingerprints on the budget. And the other thing, the reason why the legislature had decided to craft the budget was so we wouldn't spend so much time in conference between the House and the Senate members discussing the differences in the budget. But yet in Ways and Means, it was, let's take the House position here and reduce it by $1 so we can discuss it in conference. And so we had, this document right here is all the conferenceable items that we had, which was supposed to be limited with the whole premise of having the legislature do the budget. So there's a lot of revisions that need to occur in the legislative session of 2026.
We had some hiccups, but we know what they are now.
Yeah, we know what they are.
We know what they
It
are.
was a
we're
practice
going to
run.
address them.
We-
Practice run.
Yes,
Yeah.
and we will get it right next year.
We know no better, so we just went along with whatever you told us.
So you feel pretty confident, and there's hiccups, when you do something different and do it for the first time, but you all feel fairly confident that this will smooth itself out for 2026.
Well, I think so. And I told the speaker up front when we decided to have this new process, which the governor was not in favor of at all. And I told him, I said, you're going to have to give me a lot of grace because we're going to have mishaps, we're going to have issues because this is a new process. We were relying on our research department to not only handle all the bills that are introduced, but then they were also diving into all of the budget items more in depth than they ever have before. And so it was a learning process, I'll put it that way.
It's bad for our revisers because they did work their tails off.
Yeah.
And we needed them to.
I mean, they did not have a weekend off since October.
Oh, wow,
Yeah.
they were busy. Do you think the average constituent in Kansas notices a difference?
Probably
Did it affect them in any different
No,
manner?
not our constituents.
And we are finished 3 weeks earlier. So we are home with our folks earlier this
We're doing a
year.
lot of legislative updates now, earlier than usual, because we're done.
Yeah.
Well, that leads me to my next question, but before we get to that, there's been some, I'll ask of our panelists, some pushback we've heard among at least national congressional members who've been at town halls and gotten kind of some negative comments and other things going on. But I'm wondering how it's going for you here in Kansas. If you just all said, basically we're done 3 weeks early, so that really does mean you can get out and talk to constituents. How important is that? What kind of value does that bring to it? What would you say, Representative Brantley?
I think that's the key of everything we do, because we are there as a representative of our constituents, and if we leave them in the dark and we don't get out and speak with them and tell them what's going on, they don't know. So I think it's the more we're out there and telling them about this experience. It was new for us, so they say it was so rushed, but I didn't know any different. But I felt like it was good. I learned a lot, but then I need to pass that on to my constituents so they know about the changes that we are going through at the House and Senate, and so I think it's vital.
Well, let's talk about some of the highs and lows of this session, and just interject at any point. I'm curious what you might be most. We'll start with you, Senator Bowers. What you might be most proud of that has happened this session, and what do you feel like didn't go so well?
Well, we did have hearings on the shortage of rural lawyers in Kansas, so I like to focus on rural Kansas, and it didn't move forward, but at least we're talking about this, and it came from a 2-year task force from the judicial branch, so that's positive that we're making. Even if we don't pass a bill, at least we can discuss it to see, and that's modeled after how we bring veterinarians and doctors to rural Kansas. So we're not reinventing the wheel. So even just making progress, I believe Senate Bill 105, and that we discussed this early on when Troy and I were on with you, coming from the plane crash from Wichita to DC, and what would have happened if our U.S. senators were on there. So we made movement on that, where there's a legislative task force to give names to the governor. And that would be not only for our U.S. Senate, but also insurance commissioner and treasurer. And it would be also from the same party that already holds a seat. So that was important to our different parties here in Kansas. Working on a water plan, a task force that will look like what KDOT does with the 10-year plan that's already in place that they're using successful. So what is a water plan? Not only quantity where we live, but quality also. So there's movement on that, and with a report back to the legislators the next year or two. So those are some positive things that I've seen. And in the Senate, we do confirmation hearings. So it's very unique that we just confirmed another female lawyer to be a judge. She's from Pittsburgh, and we would call that the federal model, where each member of Judiciary Committee gets to ask questions, so a public hearing. So another woman, and that will bring 9 women out of 14 judges on the appellate court level. So that's really fascinating to watch this process happen.
I wonder if that's how that relates to the rest of the states, if that's a high percentage?
It is a high percentage, and I don't have that ratio, but it is one of the highest in the nation. And
Well,
we have 3 out of our 7 Supreme Court justices are women also.
Yes, I knew there were several on there. And you and I were talking earlier that some of them there's a nice contender from Western Kansas.
Yes,
from
there
rural areas.
is from, we have Goodland, Smith Center, or Smith County, and let's see, was it be Barton County where
Barton.
CJ is from?
Well, Scott City.
Scott
He's
City.
from Scott County.
So we have 3 right there who are from rural Kansas.
Good. Well, let's talk to you, Representative Waymaster. What you had your head down. You were I don't know if you even knew what else was going on around you, but what are you pleased about? And we talked about how the budget process will have to change, but what else are you pleased with happened in the session this time?
Well, as you mentioned, I was pretty much devoted to the budget at this session. One thing that I will say about having the legislature go through the budget is we stopped a lot of things that were just happening year after year after year. And one of those had to be in regards to reappropriations. And that would be money that was appropriated in the previous fiscal year, was not spent by an agency and department, and it just carried over. And so people would ask, well, what's in the reappropriation amount? And we're like, oh, well, it's, part of it's education, part of it is, capital improvements that didn't get, because the contract didn't come in. And this year we had the highest number of reappropriating dollars than we ever had before. It's like around $670 million. And by changing the budget process from the governor to the legislature, we actually analyzed the reappropriations. I mean, we had a whole list of what was being reappropriated as far as state dollars. And now we weren't able to recoup all the $670 million, but about $140 million we were. The other was a lot of the agencies, namely the Department of Commerce, and you probably had a lot of discussions in the Commerce Department on the Senate side in regards to this. So we have the Economic Development Initiatives Fund, which is the money that the state receives from the sales of lottery tickets. And we receive a portion of that. And they had, there were so many requests from the agencies that are on there. There's Department of Commerce, Ag, Board of Regents, and there's also Department of Wildlife and Parks. They had that $18 million in the red because of all their requests. And we had to go back and streamline that to make it a positive balance. One thing that I've been I'm an advocate for many years is the Sunflower Summer Program. And this was a discussion that we had with the Department of Commerce, and they said, we can make it work with $1 million. If we can change the calendar and change some of the parameters around it. And so we passed it out of the House, and then they cried foul and said, oh no, that's not enough, we need $3 million. And then that came to you guys. And we had aligned the EDIF fund in a way that we did have the buffer to move things around. And still, we have it in a positive balance. So I was very glad that we're able to keep all these economic development initiatives alive with the purpose of the lottery money, because we were able to streamline the EDIF dollars.
Remind us real quickly what the Sunflower Summertime
So the Sunflower Summer
is.
Program was actually created during the pandemic. And it was money, it was ESSER funds, ESSER 1 funds that was used from the federal government by the Department of Education, and they created an app. And they had certain venues. So I think at the beginning, it was 80 venues throughout the state?
I don't know the number, but it was, yeah.
It was 80, I believe it was
Maybe
like
80,
75 or
okay.
80 venues across the state. And what families could do is they could go to this app, find one of these venues, travel across the state of Kansas, and then the venue was reimbursed their ticket fees. They didn't have to pay anything to go see these venues. So I mean, I talked to people from, actually there were individuals from Exploration Place in Wichita, and they brought some patrons of the Sunflower Summer Program who went to the Sternberg Museum in Hayes. They went to Boot Hill in Dodge City. I mean, that got people traveling around in the state. And then some question was like, well, why is the state subsidizing the tickets for these people to go travel? The one thing that it does is it gets people, one, traveling within the state, but then they also are going to the eateries in these communities. They're also staying at the lodging. They're getting gas. I mean, the return on investment is quite substantial compared to what we're just reimbursing the tickets for. Now that number has grown from the initial 80 to around 250 venues
my.
across the state.
People are taking advantage of it.
They're taking
great.
full advantage of it, and there was more positive comments about the Sunflower Summer Program from constituents throughout the state of Kansas about that we need to keep this program viable. And
Well, it's
going.
not only fun, of course, but I'm thinking about education process.
Yeah.
That's probably, they're learning while they're having fun, and especially in the summertime, when they're out
And
of
then-
school, the students.
And then I'd say, so we can move on from that. One thing I will say, because Brenda and I served on the governor's task force for childcare, and we finally got, it was signed yesterday, we finally got a child care bill passed and signed by the legislature and signed by.
Childhood.
Yes, the Office of Early Childhood.
And that brought a lot of different groups and agencies together.
Yeah, well, it did. Well, we had 4 agencies.
4 agencies and 20 programs.
Yeah,
Wow.
that had some delving with child care. And the one thing that we learned in that task force is we got to streamline this. You can't have, because nobody knew where to go.
You couldn't find what you needed. If you're a parent or if you're a child care provider, you just never knew where to go to get the information. So
Yeah.
I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, I do too.
Good to hear. Well, let's go to the telephone now. David's been on the line. He has a question or comment. David's calling from Garden City. And David, your question or comment of our legislators this evening.
Hi, I was wondering what legislation is being considered to protect Kansas clean energy programs.
Everybody looks at
Yeah,
you.
anybody got
Utilities.
being on
I
utilities.
think that is a good place to go.
I honestly have to say we haven't discussed that topic in utilities in the Senate. I think just to be fair, I don't believe there's been an informational hearing or a hearing, but I can make sure that we do that if that's an issue that we would like to talk about. Solar panels had a bill this year that didn't have a hearing, so that's one that I do know. And do you all know on your House side?
I will say in tax, they came in and asked for tax exemptions on like battery storage systems that they would put, like when they could save the energy like off of the windmills or anything like that, and then use it during peak times. So they've got some stuff coming out like that that's getting better and better all the time. But the big thing is, how much do we want to spend in tax abatements to be able to allow it to come in? So that's always the rub. You have to just determine if it's going to be how beneficial. So.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, we'll write that one down.
We have another caller on the line with us now. Bruce is calling from Lindsborg. And Bruce, your comment or question of our legislators this evening.
Yes, I'd like to get their thoughts on reforming PBMs because they're sure hurting our rural pharmacies. I'll hang up and listen to their thoughts.
Your thoughts?
So I'm a chair of financial institutions and insurance, and we have a PBM bill that will probably come to fruition next session. We just could not get the language crafted in such a way that the pharmacists who came, we had pharmacy day at the Capitol, and we had 400 pharmacists who came to visit us, and they gave us a presentation in my committee on what pharmacy benefit managers do for us and what barriers and obstacles they create for our rural pharmacies and for our independent pharmacies. And so we probably will have a bill. We just had to get the language in such a way that it made sense for us to have a hearing and for it to be legal, because there are this is a federal issue that has filtered down to the states. And so do we take the lead on that now with language that isn't really appropriate yet, or do we let the federal government and our congressional delegation work on that? So we've decided if we can get a bill, I like the word viable, we've heard a lot today, but if we can get a viable bill that we can have a hearing on that will benefit our local communities, our pharmacies, and especially our rural pharmacies, then we will have a hearing on that and see what, if we can get that out of committee. Because there are things that federally, when you have a prescription, a pharmacy benefit manager will control the cost of that prescription and will not reimburse the local pharmacy at the level that prescription costs them. And so there's a great gap there in the expense of that prescription. So as a consumer, you get the benefit, but as a pharmacist, you don't. It costs you more money to fill that prescription than the dollars that you spend.
And when you talk about what it does for rural pharmacies, is it just because that gap is greater for the rural pharmacy?
Yes.
Okay.
And
They
you
don't
have
have the volume of buying.
Right.
And you have fewer, exactly, you have fewer folks who come in to get the prescriptions filled. You have less return on those prescriptions because you're not getting reimbursed at the rate that others are. And so it just becomes a not very equitable situation, and we find pharmacies that just, like a small business, cannot stay in business. So it's on our radar. We've got a bill that's being drafted. We hope to have it ready for next session, which our next session is January 12th, 2026.
Sounds odd when you say 2026, doesn't it? But it's a-coming. So Bruce, stay tuned. We'll find out more. Again, we want to remind you that if you have a question or comment that you would like to make of our panelists, please give us a call. It's 1-800-337-4788. I do want to get to that email that came in earlier, and this is specifically pointed to Representative Waymaster and Senator Bowers regarding Senate Bill 223. This is related to Russell County. It would have allowed the Board of County Commissioners to place a county-wide retailer sale tax on the ballot for financing the cost of attendance centers or other school districts. And the writer says the bill did have a hearing in the Senate Tax and Assessment Committee on February 26. No opponent to testimony and multiple proponents. Local proponents, elected officials from USD 407, the Board of County Commissioners, the City of Russell. The writer wants to know what happened to the bill, what is the status, and why did it not move forward? And then what were your positions on this? Did you support or not? And if so, why? If not, why?
How about I'll start, since it was a Senate bill, and then we'll both weigh in on this. So we did have a bill introduced in the Senate, and it was modeled after a bill from last year. And you have to remind me what school district that was.
Well, I don't know if I'd say modeled.
The idea came from.
That's where the idea came from. It was different circumstances. So in Rawlins County, there was a school that was broken into, caught on fire. They needed to have an availability of funds quickly to refurbish that school. And so in the tax bill that we had last year, we allowed for Rawlins County to set up for a vote on a sales tax so they could go ahead and those county commissioners could authorize that and then the voters would vote whether or not to allow the sales tax to fund for the refurbishment of that school. So that was Rawlins County. It was Rawlins County.
So premised off of that idea, we did have a Senate hearing, and the local folks did an excellent job. Excellent. Troy and I were both in there, and we're very proud of how they handled that. So then once a bill has a hearing, it is up to the committee if they're going to work this bill. So then it moves out to the Senate floor for a vote and then moves across to the House. So on Dawn's committee where she's on tax, she would hear it over there. So it did not get out of committee. So that is where it's at. But it has opened up the more of a discussion of how we can allow the counties to raise the amount, but then should it be for education? What can it be for? So there is more questions that it opened up. And then should it be a sales tax increase to build schools? Or is that a bonding question? So it just raised a lot of topics that the tax committee decided they wanted to analyze more. Or is it just a situation from last year that came over this year? Is this the way that we want to raise this tax dollars and what it's used for? So that was the bigger conversation on, or do we just raise it across raise this amount across the state, and they don't have to come to the legislature to ask us for an increase? So it's the tax chair likened it to pushing on a balloon on one way and it pops out the other way. It's just brought up many more topics than just not Russell County. Not that simple.
Yeah, it's not simple. And that's what Elaine and I had a meeting early on in session when we even discussed the idea about introducing the bill. And I expressed in that meeting to the individuals that were there from the school district, the county, that the likelihood of this passing the legislature is nil. It's probably not going to pass. And during the hearing, and Elaine's right, I mean, the local individuals, the local county commissioner, a former teacher of Russell High School, was a conferee. They did an excellent job explaining the rationale and the reason why we need to have new schools in USD 407. But at the same time, I don't know how many times the chairperson of the Senate Tax Committee said, we will be setting and opening up a new precedent if we pass this. And then she kept referencing back to the issue with Rawlins County and why that was included in the tax package. And that was the main concern, because School districts, as Hayes did, they went to the city of Hayes. They're already the authority to go to the city sales tax for a school building, for construction of a school building. If you fall under the county commissioners, that's where it comes under state legislature jurisdiction, and we have to give the authority to the county commissioners to allow for a vote to see whether or not it passes or not. And so my feeling is I'm supportive of them going what's already in law. Go to the city of Russell and you know, in addition to their sales tax, just like Hayes did when they built their new high school. But I will express what I expressed, and Elaine and I expressed in the meeting, the likelihood of this passing the legislature is minimal. It's probably not going to happen.
We have another caller on the line with us now. Elizabeth from Whitington is waiting to talk to our panelists this evening. Elizabeth, your question or comment, please.
Good evening, and thank you so much for taking my call. Regarding green energy, there's a lot of concerns in the public right now regarding the efficacy of green energy, specifically windmills and also solar panels. Even though they may not be, using supposedly greenhouse gases, it still has a lot of environmental impact on the region, particularly from what to do with these products when they start becoming defective and breaking down due to wear and tear. So and this, maybe Sherri can answer this a little bit better because she probably is already very up to date on what's happening out here in Cheyenne Bottoms, but there's been a lot of concern because we're on the major flyway that the solar panels they've been wanting to put out here, what happens when these things break down? What's the environmental impact going to be? Who's actually going to be responsible? And particularly like these companies that are coming in are not even local companies, and they're not even, some of them in many cases are not even companies that are United States companies. They're from other countries. Who's going to dispose of these products? Where are they going to go? The solar panels? And we're just very concerned. In general, the question is we're very concerned about the environmental impact of these so-called green products. What are the legislatures doing to make sure that these folks are going to be responsible for properly disposing of this equipment when it's finished? So I guess that's the main gist of my question. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So, Representative Brantley?
So we have had the proposal of a solar farm out near Cheyenne Bottoms, and last year we had several meetings, and I think Representative Waymaster, you were there with me with one of them. And who has the right to be there? Several locations have already been leased to the solar farms, so that creates a question. But as far as the flyway and the wildlife and such out at Cheyenne Bottoms, there was a big pushback that the community didn't want it. And so we had several meetings around last fall, I believe it was, and met with several of the state officials and brought that question out. And it had been stopped. I know that it's starting to creep back in again from another company. I believe it's a foreign company, but it's still alive. And what do we do about this? But I believe they are looking at maybe not Cheyenne Bottoms, but another location. But the one thing I want to encourage, and I appreciate Elizabeth calling in, the last meeting we had at Barton County Community College, we brought all three counties in and the county commissioners. It was a fabulous meeting. That we were able to bring that together, but if we want to support that as a fellow constituent, I live right out by Cheyenne Bottoms, we have to have the community, we have to have as many people as we can get in those meetings and attending those meetings. The first couple were attended fairly well, and then that last one just really didn't have very many local people there. And so one thing I'm going to throw in since we're here, let's really encourage, if we have meetings coming forward, that we can have, we have our community represented well with larger numbers, and make sure that our voice is heard. But I think that there's some safety nets. Doug over at the Pawnee County Attorney, he's very active in like the NHTSA electric corridor, but this is with the solar panels, I think, is another issue, but we're just going to have to stay on top of it. We've been trying to make sure anything that we hear at the state level that we ask and stay abreast of, but I think it's just something we just have to stay on and keep informed about.
Your companies have
Yeah.
a lot of money at stake.
A lot of
They're
money.
going to stay persistent the whole way through, but it affects you guys. Where you live,
Yeah.
it's going to change your life if it doesn't the way you want it. So,
And
yeah.
and when we quit attending and bringing that forward to the officials and the companies and letting them know how we feel, and the numbers start dropping in attendance, then they feel like maybe that might be a way in. So we have to be very careful that if this is something that our community is wanting to stop or support, whichever, we need to make sure that the people are represented in that meeting and are attending.
I think it's very important, as Dawn would know as a county commissioner, the decision is made at the local level. Absolutely. And so that county commission needs to be talked to or discussed with more, and at these meetings as well. But to be really engaged with your county local leaders, and if there's a zoning committee as well.
We have a caller on the line. Chris is with us from Ellsworth County. Chris, your question or comment this evening?
Hi, thanks for having me. I have two questions, and one was what's the logic behind eliminating the 3-day grace period? I know it was sold as a means of preventing fraudulent voting, but I still think it was a terrible idea, mainly because a lot of elderly people rely on the postal service. So that's my comment. And the other question is, does the flat tax bill that was passed have any provision for reverting back to a previous tax level should state revenues decrease, say, as a result of a recession? Thank you.
Okay, a couple good questions there. Let's start with the 3-day grace period on ballots coming in after the election day, and we decided that you get it together and vote on time, and also there is the idea of I know a lot of it in Hayes, especially in Ellis County, there's early voting that they really promote, and I think that's true across the state. Well,
I know when we were debating that bill, Dawn and I actually had many conversations about this, because I think both of us kind of at an impasse on this. And I don't know what I can't speak for Dawn, but I could say the reason why I voted for that bill in eliminating the 3-day grace period was the comment, election day is election day. So have your ballot in on election day and not 3 days or that Friday after election day after it's happened. But at the same time, I feel considerate towards those that use mail-in voting, because their vote that they're putting in the mail is dependent on the U.S. Postal Service. And that has not been dependable in the last few years. And it looks like it may become less dependable on what's coming down in discussions from Washington, D.C.
And that would be why I voted against it to begin with, and then I voted for it, and it was because if you want to make sure and know your vote's going to count, have it there on that day. Instead of counting on the U.S. Postal Service.
To the courthouse, you can use a drop box, we have other ways of making sure that your ballot is there by election day. And I mean, the mail service is progressively going to be getting worse, as it looks like. So we cannot depend on mail. And 3 days is not, sometimes it takes a week for something to get from here to Kansas City.
And even if you do everything right, like in Bennington, our mail gets a postmark from Wichita. So you get a lot of mail that doesn't even have a postmark anymore because of how they've...
But that was one argument that I was going to make a voting against it, was because that kept being brought up by the elections chairman. Like, some post office don't even postmark it. We can't. In rural areas, we can't.
And if it's not postmarked, though, then according to statute, you couldn't count it.
Right.
So-
and so I mean, I was in an impasse at that bill.
It was hard.
We have about 2 minutes. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I voted against it, and I continually voted against it because I have 22 nursing homes in my district. And so we reduced the number of ballots. If you wanted to vote early, you know, and you're in a nursing home or you're physically disabled, only one person can carry 10 ballots to the drop box or to the election office for you. And so it used to be a CNA could take your advance ballots and take them to the election office. Well, now only 10. And that's it. And it's a misdemeanor if you take more than that. So that to me was extremely important for my nursing homes because they were very upset about that. So we do have drop boxes. We have one in Shawnee County.
All it takes is a few fraudulent people ruining it for
And
everybody. And that's pretty
right.
much what's happened.
Yeah. And so that drop box is a good thing, without a doubt. But you only have one in Shawnee County.
That surprises me.
And it's at the election office.
Yeah.
So I just, for me, I felt I needed to represent my constituents, so I voted no.
We are, believe it or not, just about out of time. And I wish we had more time because we could, because of that and other reasons.
Sorry,
but it
Chris.
has been wonderful talking to all of you this evening and having the input of many of our listeners and viewers this evening. We appreciate it. And I want to thank all of you for your time tonight and for your time in Topeka. And I know that you'll be busy over the summer. We were talking earlier before we went on the air, you'll be working on summer committees. So staying busy, and we appreciate all that hard work. Our guests this evening have been Senator Elaine Bowers, Representative Troy Waymaster, and also joining us Senator Brenda Dietrich and Representative Don Wolf, and also along with Representative Sherri Brantley for the very first time. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for being with us this evening. I'm your host, Becky Kaiser.